So after this lesson, you should be able to explain the difference between federal and state pharmacy laws, recall common pharmacy laws through history, identify the FDA, DEA, and State Board of Pharmacy as agencies that regulate the practice of pharmacy, comprehend the roles of the FDA, DEA, and State Board of Pharmacy, explain the difference between licensure and certification, and comprehend the requirements for PTCB certification. We do have a disclaimer down at the bottom. It's basically saying that your interpretation of the law, as well as the law how it stands when you watch this video, we are not liable for. The law may change between now and when you watch the video. It is up to you to look further into the law to interpret it, and we cannot be held liable for any actions you take based off of watching this video. We're going to start with pharmacy governing bodies. So there are numerous organizations that help to regulate and govern the practice of pharmacy on both the federal and the state level. This lesson is going to dive deeper into some of those organizations to explore their role in governing pharmacy. Starting with the Food and Drug Administration, they're commonly called the FDA. They're responsible for ensuring the safety and efficacy of medications, medical devices, and biologics. The FDA oversees the approval, manufacturing, labeling, dispensing, recall, and research of all of the above items. The FDA also oversees the reporting of adverse events and assigning safety warnings such as black box warnings. Moving on to drug approvals, this is the development of drugs. So the development of drugs is very complex and time-consuming. On average, it takes about 8 to 15 years for a new drug to be developed and approved by the FDA, and there are 3 steps in that development process. So starting with research, moving on to testing, and then finally the approval by the FDA. All of this starts with drug development. So research of a new drug takes a team of scientists from different disciplines. It may include pharmacologists, toxicologists, clinical pharmacologists, pharmacists, and physicians. Pharmaceutical companies often employ schools and research institutes to perform research on new medications, and the objective research is to find a new active ingredient or to modify the structure of already existing drugs in order to find a new therapy for patients. So the testing on these drugs begins in the laboratory. This is where the stability, structure, and dosage form of the drugs are determined. If it passes the laboratory test, new drugs are then tested in animals and humans. Testing in animals is done to assess the toxicity, and a new drug must be proven safe before it's allowed to be tested in humans. Testing in humans is regulated by the FDA in a 3-phase approval process that we're going to talk about more. So here's a picture depicting the drug approval process, starting with preclinical or that research up in the left-hand corner, moving on to the testing on animals for toxicity. Then an investigational new drug application is submitted before it moves into phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. After that, the new drug application is reviewed, and then they'll receive their FDA approval results. Starting with phase 1 clinical trials. So this is when a new drug is tested on only a few healthy volunteers at the lowest dose, and it is slowly increased. So the objective of this phase is to assess the initial dose and determine if humans can tolerate the drug, or toxicology. Pharmacokinetics, or absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion of the drug are also determined in this phase. So this phase will begin to determine if there are any side effects to using the medication. Next, we have phase 2. If the drug is promising, it is now tested on a few hundred volunteers who have the condition that the drug is intended for. So extensive data on the pharmacokinetic and toxicology profiles of the drug are collected in this phase. The optimal dose of the drug will also be determined in this phase. So most medications do not make it beyond this phase, because this is the phase where they're starting to see if the drug actually works for what they created it for. Finally, before the approval, we have phase 3 clinical trials. So if the new drug remains promising, it is now tested on thousands of patients in a healthcare setting such as teaching hospitals. The objective of this phase is to test the efficacy, or how effective a drug is. So this phase has to be done in a randomized, double-blind clinical trial. This is where 2 patient groups are randomly assigned to either receive the drug or a placebo, which a placebo is typically like a capsule or a tablet with no active ingredient in it, and this is to prove that the drug does work. This is the final phase that a drug must go through to get approval for the condition that's listed on the application. So after the drug is approved, it'll enter phase 4 clinical trials, or what's called the post-marketing surveillance phase. Drug interactions, use in pregnancy, and long-term side effect profiles are typically collected in this phase. Pharmacists and patients are encouraged to report dangerous side effects to the FDA via MedWatch, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, so they can be tracked and reported on package inserts for that medication. Just so you know, this phase never ends as long as the drug is still available, so no matter how long the drug has been on the market, if a new side effect comes out, you should absolutely report it because it can get added to the medication's package insert for patients. Now we're going to shift from drug approvals to drug recalls. Recalls are actions taken by a firm to remove a product from the market. Recalls may be conducted on a firm's own initiative, by FDA request, or by FDA order on a statutory authority. There are 3 classes of medication recalls, and then there are 2 other types of recalls that are far more common. These recalls include market withdrawals and medical device safety alerts. The FDA does keep a running list of all active recalls online if you'd like more information on current recalls. Let's look at the different classes of drug recalls. So a Class 1 recall is a situation in which there is a reasonable probability that the use of or exposure to a recalled product will cause serious adverse health consequences or even death. So this is our most serious recall. Then we have Class 2 recalls, which is a situation in which use of or exposure to a recalled product may cause temporarily or medically reversible harm or adverse health consequences where the probability of serious adverse health consequences is remote. This is saying that while it still may cause harm, it is temporary or reversible harm. It's not permanent harm or death like we saw in a Class 1 recall. So still very serious, but not quite as serious as Class 1 recalls. A Class 3 recall is a situation in which use of or exposure to a recalled product is not likely to cause adverse health consequences. So Class 3 is our least serious recall. Then we have market withdrawals. So this occurs when a product has a minor violation that would not be subject to FDA legal action. This is when the firm removes the product from the market or corrects the violation themselves without the FDA having to intervene. For example, a product that's removed from the market due to tampering, without evidence of manufacturing or distribution products, would be a market withdrawal. In addition to market withdrawals, we have medical device safety alerts. So this is issued in situations where a medical device may present an unreasonable risk of substantial harm. In some cases, these situations are also considered recalls. We're going to discuss now how you should handle recalls. So step 1 is going to be pull the medication. So if you have a recall for amoxicillin 500 milligrams, you're going to want to pull all of the amoxicillin 500 milligram bottles you have in your stock and set them to the side. Step 2, you want to compare the lot numbers. So compare the lot number on each of your amoxicillin 500 milligram bottles to the lot number that's being recalled by the manufacturer or the FDA. Step 3, you want to dispose or return of the recalled medication. So after comparing the lot numbers, dispose of or return any recalled medication that you may have in stock per company policy. Do not dispense the recalled medication to patients. Return or dispose of the recalled medication per your company's standard operating procedure. So this may involve sending it back to the manufacturer. It may involve disposing of it so it doesn't get distributed to patients. Just make sure you're following whatever your pharmacy's procedure is for handling recalls. Finally, step 4 is notify. Most pharmacies notify patients that may possess a medication in a Class 1 recall, so that really serious recall. And then usually there are specific instructions regarding the pharmacy's duty to notify affected patients. So you may not notify patients on all recalls. It may just be those serious ones because not all recalls may cause harm to the patient. So just follow again your pharmacy's standard operating procedures for how you should notify patients and when to notify patients. Another role of the FDA is ensuring medication safety. So they do this through clinical trials, post-marketing research, as well as adverse event reporting. The FDA uses MedWatch, like I said, for providers and patients to report adverse events from medications. The FDA may also place a black box warning on medications to ensure their safety. We're going to talk a little bit about MedWatch. So as a pharmacy technician, you are obliged to report any adverse events that a patient reports to you to MedWatch. MedWatch is the FDA's way of tracking side effects of medications after they've been approved and introduced into the market. The website also includes information about any current safety issues in pharmacy should patients have questions about recalls or safety. So we see this a lot with the ranitidine and metformin recalls that we're seeing right now in 2020. A lot of patients have questions about these. You can absolutely go to MedWatch on the FDA's website to get the answers to those questions for patients. Some of the information that the FDA gets from MedWatch, they'll use to form black box warnings. So the FDA may issue a black box warning if there's an adverse event of serious concern associated with a medication. Black box warnings serve to warn physicians, pharmacists, and patients of severe risks associated with using certain medications. Common medications with black box warnings include lamotrigine for fatal skin rash, ciprofloxacin and levofloxacin for tendon rupture, and antidepressants for suicidality. Moving forward to the Drug Enforcement Administration, this is commonly referred to as the DEA. They work to enforce controlled substance laws to help minimize dependence and diversion. Major tasks of the DEA include classifying medications as scheduled C1 through C5 based on their risk of dependence, investigating reports of loss or theft of controlled substances, as well as verifying pharmacy records and inventory. Finally, they require pharmacies and practitioners be registered with a unique DEA number in an attempt to track the prescribing and dispensing of controlled substances. A useful tool for this is your state's prescription monitoring program, or PMP, and we're going to talk more about both of these. We're going to start with verifying DEA numbers. Pharmacists are responsible for verifying a provider's DEA number as being active when they get a prescription from them. DEA numbers consist of 2 letters followed by 7 numbers. The first letter is going to be the type of DEA registrant. The second letter should be the first letter of the provider's last name. With advancements in technology, most DEA numbers can be verified online, but it is a valuable tool to know how to verify a DEA number by hand, just because if a natural disaster happens or if you're working out in the community and prescribing is necessary, you're going to want to be able to verify that a provider's DEA number is active even if you do not have access to a computer. Now we're going to walk through the steps for verifying a DEA number together. So the first step is to add the first, third, and fifth numbers together. Then from there, you're going to add the second, fourth, and sixth numbers together. The sum that you just got in step 2, you're going to multiply by 2. You want to add the sums from the first and third steps together. Once you've added those 2 numbers, you're going to verify that the second number of the sum from this last step is the same as the last number of the provider's DEA. If it is, go ahead and fill your patient's prescription. So I've included an example for you here. Down at the bottom, you can see the DEA number. You can also see the steps. Go ahead and pause the video now, use the prompts provided, and see if you can come to the same answer and verify the patient's DEA. The provider's DEA. Now let's go through it together. So we see our DEA number at the bottom. We're going to start with step 1, and we're going to add the first, third, and fifth numbers together. So we add 1, 6, and 9 together to get 16. From there, we're going to add the second, fourth, and sixth numbers together. That's 4 plus 7 plus 8, which equals 19. We then multiply the sum in the second step by 2. So the sum from our second step was 19. We multiply it by 2. That gives us 38. The fourth and final step is to add the totals from step 1 and 3 together and verify that the second digit of that sum is the same as the last digit of the DEA number you're verifying. So our sum from step 3 and step 1 together is 16 plus 38, which is equal to 54. The second digit of that number is a 4, and the last digit of this provider's DEA number is a 4, so everything checks out okay. Moving on to prescription monitoring programs, or PMPs. They provide information about the date, quantity, name of the medication, name of the pharmacy, and name of the prescriber for controlled substances. States vary in who is allowed to access the PMP, however, all pharmacists and prescribers have access. There are functions to alert providers of high opioid doses, frequent fills of controlled substances, different providers, all in an effort to decrease the risk of overdose, dependence, and diversion. And I've included a graph here just to show you the importance of having a prescription monitoring program because we have seen a very large increase in deaths due to drug overdoses containing opioids. So this isn't put in place to infringe upon patients' rights or really harbor on them for getting opiates, but rather to just keep an eye on those that are at risk and maybe intervene, offer them the help they need, offer them Narcan just to keep them safe. Next, we'll discuss the Joint Commission. So the Joint Commission is responsible for accrediting and certifying healthcare organizations across the country. As a pharmacy technician, you may be involved in a Joint Commission inspection. When Joint Commission inspects, they're looking to ensure the highest quality healthcare is provided to patients. From a pharmacy perspective, Joint Commission strives to ensure that the handling of patients' medications is done safely. Activities the Joint Commission may observe include compounding of sterile and non-sterile medications, handling of inventory, the disposal of inventory, as well as the cleanliness of the pharmacy. We also have the State Board of Pharmacy. They're responsible for regulating the practice of pharmacy on a state level. This includes the regulation of the scope of pharmacists, pharmacies, pharmacy technicians, and pharmacy interns. The Board of Pharmacy is responsible for licensure and certification requirements for all pharmacy personnel. They also set standards and regulations for areas of pharmacy including hiring, compounding, dispensing, the technician to pharmacist ratio, and more. So this is really going to be where you look to know all of your state laws, where you need to get your certification, your licensure, all of those requirements of you every year in order to renew your licensure. That's all going to come from your State Board of Pharmacy. We also have the National Association of the Board of Pharmacy. This organization does not have the authority to regulate or enforce laws, but instead they set guidance for the practice of pharmacy, as well as the trajectory of the practice of pharmacy. NABP is also responsible for tracking continuing education hours, which we're going to talk about more, and exams affiliated with the pharmacy profession. Overall, NABP oversees the State Board of Pharmacies, providing assistance to them wherever they're needed. Then we have the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, or ASHP. This is a professional organization representing the interests of pharmacists who practice in hospitals, health maintenance organizations, long-term care facilities, home care, and other components of healthcare. More recently, they have begun setting standards for the training of pharmacy technicians, with most states looking to ASHP to outline objectives for their pharmacy technician training programs. And then finally, we have the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education. This organization accredits PharmD programs and continuing education programs. As a technician, you're going to need to choose CEs or continuing education programs that have the ACPE accreditation. Now we're going to discuss the difference between federal and state pharmacy law. You're going to be exposed to a few of the laws that govern the practice of pharmacy in this lesson. We're going to examine those in more detail, but it's important to note that these laws are federal laws. Each state has additional legislation to the laws that we're going to be presenting, and due to the wide variance in those laws, they're not going to be presented. For more information on your particular state policies, be sure to consult your state's Board of Pharmacy website. When interpreting a law, you should always follow the more strict law, regardless of whether it's a federal or a state law. Here we have some examples of federal pharmacy laws. We have the Federal Food and Drug Act of 1906, which changed the labeling of medications. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, which addressed misbranding and adulteration. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 established the DEA and started scheduling medications. The Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005 regulated and limited the purchase of Sudafed. So the important takeaway from all of these is that federal pharmacy laws govern practice nationally, and they're typically aimed at the regulation or safety of pharmacy practice as a whole. They're large umbrella laws. Next, we have examples of state pharmacy laws. So starting with North Dakota, only a licensed pharmacist or group of pharmacists can own and operate a pharmacy within the state. In Oklahoma, at no time will a pharmacist substitute or cause to be substituted any drug, medicine, chemical, or pharmaceutical preparation without the authority of the prescriber or purchaser. In Idaho, 6 technicians may work under the supervision of every one pharmacist. And really, the important takeaway from all of these is not to know these specific laws, but that state pharmacy laws are typically more specific and strict than federal pharmacy laws. With that being said, we are going to dive into each of these federal pharmacy laws individually. These are very popular pharmacy laws for you to know. They are the ones that have changed pharmacy practice throughout the years. So starting with the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, this was the first federal law regulating drugs. It prevented manufacturing, sale, distribution of inaccurately labeled food and drugs across state lines. It required that labels contained accurate information about a medication's strength and its purity. From there, we saw the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. It required drugs be therapeutic. You couldn't put a drug on the market that didn't have any benefit for the patient. It also prohibited adulteration and misbranding. So adulteration is unsanitary packing, or when strength, quantity, or purity differs from the package label. Misbranding is the false labeling or the absence of warning labels. From there, we saw the Durham-Humphrey Amendment in 1951. This is what separated medication into 2 groups. First, we have over-the-counter medications, which required to have caution and warning labels on the bottles. Also required to name all ingredients and quantities on the bottles of these medications. We also got legend or prescription medications with this amendment, which required to have on the label, caution. Federal law prohibits dispensing without a prescription. Then we had the Kefauver-Harris Amendment, This was in 1962. Manufacturers must prove their drug is effective prior to marketing, so the drugs could not go on the market until we knew that they were effective. It also led to standardized labeling requirements and required that package inserts on legend medications be included when the medications are delivered. Also mandated good manufacturing processes. In 1970 is when we saw the introduction of the Controlled Substances Act, or the CSA. We've talked about this one a few times, but it regulated the use and distribution of medications that could lead to abuse, also created the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and set up drug schedules for medications. Also in 1970, we saw the Poison Prevention Act, or the PPA. The goal of this was to reduce accidental poisonings in children. It required the use of child safety caps on substances that are potentially harmful, which is most drugs. Those child safety caps should be significantly difficult for a 5-year-old to remove, and exceptions to this include nitroglycerin, those that have a waiver from the patient, and certain less than harmful medications. Then in 1972, we saw the Drug Listing Act. This compiled a list of all of the marketed medications and assigned those medications an NDC number. So an example of an NDC number can be seen here. The first 5 digits designate the manufacturer, the next 4 digits are the product code, and the last 2 digits are the package size code. Following that, we saw the Orphan Drug Act in 1983. This enables manufacturers to create medications for use in rare diseases, and they'll get a 50% tax incentive, 7-year market exclusivity, and research grants for the clinical testing of the medication. A rare disease is defined as less than 200,000 people in the United States being affected by that disease. So this made it a lot easier for when those rare diseases pop up for companies to be enticed to create medications to treat these rare diseases. In 1984, we saw the introduction of the Waxman Act. This is also known as the Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act. This ensured that brand name drug manufacturers would be entitled to market exclusivity for a period of time. It also allowed for less expensive generics to enter the marketplace after that period of time expired. Then in 1990, we saw the introduction of OBRA, which is also called the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. Excuse me, I am struggling to talk today. Initially, it required pharmacists to offer counseling to all Medicaid and Medicare patients. It has since been expanded to require pharmacists to offer counseling to all patients on all fills of a prescription. So this is where you'll see that you always ask your patients, do you have any questions for the pharmacist? Is there anything you need to speak with the pharmacist about? OBRA is what expanded that to all patients. In 1990, we also saw the Anabolic Steroid Control Act. Anabolic steroids promote muscle growth yet have serious health consequences when they're abused. This act reclassified anabolic steroids as C3 medications, providing for greater penalties when sold or used illegally. Then in 1996, we saw the introduction of HIPAA, one of the most famous pharmacy laws known to man. This is also called the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It defined protected health information, or PHI. Pharmacies were then required to institute policies to guard patients' PHI, and severe civil and criminal penalties were put into place to protect PHI. Here you can see some of the common HIPAA privacy violations by type. So data disclosed without authorization from the patient. We see data physically stolen, data lost and not accounted for, improper disposal of data, and data compromised by hackers. Unfortunately, the highest one we see is data physically stolen, and this could include taking things that have patients' information out of the office, out of the pharmacy, taking it home, and then somebody getting a hold of it, and now they have the patient's information. So it's definitely something to take seriously. You can get federally fined for this. You will lose your license. You will lose your job. So definitely protect patients' private health information as much as you possibly can. The next year in 1997, we saw the FDA Modernization Act. This sped up the approval of new medications and modified many of the steps in the approval process. It also changed the caution federal law prohibits dispensing without a prescription to read RX only. More recently, in 2003, we saw the Medicare Prescription Drug Modernization Act. This established a part of Medicare to assist with the purchasing of prescription medications, or Medicare Part D, as you've probably heard it, and all Medicare enrollees are eligible. And then I've included this graphic here for you just to show that the spending in those enrolled in Part D for Medicare is substantially higher than those that are not enrolled in Part D. Their expenditure on average in dollars every year is typically about $12,168 if you're enrolled in Part D, compared to only about $5,200 if they're not enrolled in Part D. So you see double the amount of spending that's being spent just by being in Part D, which is a substantial amount of coverage that's added for these patients. You have a substantial amount of people that are using Medicare Part D all the time. And then finally, in 2005, we saw the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act. This required all vendors of pseudoephedrine or Sudafed and ephedrine to sell these products from behind the counter of a pharmacy. It also required record keeping of all sales and limited the amounts of these products sold to 3.6 grams a day and 9 grams per 30 days. Now that we've touched on HIPAA, we're going to dive deeper into patient confidentiality. This is one of the most important aspects of pharmacy law. HIPAA sets forth guidelines for the protection of protected health information, or PHI, like we said. So this is any information about a patient, including demographics that could be linked to a single person. So this can be past, present, or future conditions, information about providing care to the patient, past, present, or future payment information, patient names, birth dates, social security numbers and addresses, and full face photographic images and comparable images. So here we have some ways to protect protected health information. All of these are excellent ways to prevent patients' PHI from being breached. So number one is avoid saying PHI aloud, especially if other patients are around. This may mean writing it down and shredding it after, but just using caution saying anything about a patient out loud. Number two is logging out of any software containing PHI immediately when finished, so you're not leaving those databases up for anybody to walk up to. Number three, shred any documents with PHI on them. That prevents anybody from taking them out of the pharmacy. Number four, do not text or email any PHI to anyone regardless of your role. Number five, close any office or pharmacy doors when discussing patients to prevent anyone overhearing. And number six, refer to patients by de-identifiers such as initials or medical record numbers, sometimes called MRNs. Now the part that you've all been waiting for, licensure and certification. So these two are commonly confused. They are important to understand as soon as you start your career as a pharmacy technician, what the difference in them are. So we're here to help you navigate the two so we can get you to work as quickly as possible. So licensure is what legally allows you to work as a pharmacy technician. Licensure requirements vary by state and may include taking a course, such as this one, taking the PTCB exam, which we're preparing you for, or having work experience. Certification is what states that you are capable of doing your job as a pharmacy technician. So this is what the Pharmacy Technician Certification Exam, or PTCE, will provide you. By passing the PTCE, you've confirmed your ability to perform the role of a pharmacy technician. Thus, you're certified nationwide. Many states use the PTCE certification as grounds for providing licensures to pharmacy technicians. So certification is certifying that you check all of the competencies that pharmacy technicians require, but licensure is what legally allows you to work as a pharmacy technician. So here are some examples of licensure requirements as of August 2020. In Arizona, you must become nationally certified through the PTCB and register with the State Board of Pharmacy. In Connecticut, you must become nationally certified through the PTCB or another approved certifying agency. In New York, there are currently no requirements for licensure. And in the 47 plus other states, just remember it's important to check your state's licensure requirements just to ensure you're meeting all those requirements prior to registering for your license as a pharmacy technician. Again, we are a PTCB certified course. We are preparing you for the PTCE. If your state simply requires that you get certified through PTCB, we are on the right track. Now we'll discuss continuing education. Based on your state's licensure requirements, you will probably have to complete a certain amount of continuing education hours each year. So these keep you informed of current trends in pharmacies and make sure that you don't fall behind in what's happening in the world. Now we're going to discuss the PTCB certification requirements as they stand right now. First is completion of a PTCB recognized education or training program. That's us. Second, alternatively, an equivalent of at least 500 hours of work experience as a pharmacy technician is required if you're not going to take the exam or go through the education course. Number three, full disclosure of all criminal and State Board of Pharmacy registration or licensure actions. Number four, compliance with all applicable PTCB certification policies. And finally, number five, a passing score on the Pharmacy Technician Certification Exam, or PTCE, which we are preparing you for. So we've included a typical timeline to becoming a pharmacy technician. This is just an example for PTCB certification and then subsequently state licensure. This is assuming that PTCB certification is the state's sole requirement for licensure. This timeline is for example purposes only and will vary by state. So first, you'll enroll and succeed in RX Tech exam. We are so glad you're here. Then you verify your state's licensure requirements. You'll schedule and pass the PTCE and receive your PTCB certification, saying that you are certified to fill the role as a pharmacy technician. From there, you'll register for state licensure as a pharmacy technician on your State Board of Pharmacy's website. You'll receive your license, and then you'll move on to start your career. As far as continuing education for certification, currently PTCB certification requires the completion of 20 hours of continuing education per every 2-year renewal. 1 hour of these 20 must be in pharmacy law and 1 hour must be in patient safety. All continuing education hours must be covering pharmacy technician material to be eligible for recertification. So typically you're going to have continuing education in order to keep your license up to date, but also to keep your certification up to date. It's really important that you know both of those requirements so that both of them stay up to date. Now to summarize all this. Federal laws tend to be more broad and tackle issues such as safety, where state laws are typically more strict and specific. Between federal and state law, the more strict laws should be followed in practice. With that being said, common historical pharmacy laws laid the groundwork for modern-day pharmacy law. Important historical pharmacy laws include those that establish the FDA and DEA and many more. The FDA is responsible for regulating the safety, efficacy, approval, manufacturing, and recall of medications. The DEA, on the other hand, is responsible for regulating and scheduling controlled substances. The Joint Commission is responsible for accrediting and certifying healthcare organizations to a high standard of care. The State Board of Pharmacy is responsible for licensing and pharmacy personnel and determining specific pharmacy regulations. NABP, or the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy, is responsible for supporting the State Board of Pharmacies across the country and handling many education aspects of pharmacy. The FDA, DEA, Joint Commission, State Board of Pharmacies, and NABP are all regulatory agencies that govern and influence the practice of pharmacy. Their roles span from drug safety, tracking continuing education, prevention of opioid diversion, and establishing state pharmacy laws. Licensure requirements are going to vary by state. With that being said, the requirements for PTCB certification include completing a PTCB approved program or 500 hours of work experience as a pharmacy technician, as well as other clerical requirements. Finally, licensure and certification are commonly confused. Licensure legally allows you to work as a pharmacy technician. Certification states that you are capable of performing the duties of a pharmacy technician. Remember, it's super important for you to know your pharmacy laws in your state so that you're abiding by them and protecting yourself as well as protecting your patients. Have a great day.